There is something inside the Great Wall of China. Not on it, not along it, inside it, within the structure itself. Rooms, chambers, sealed spaces built into the wall during its construction and never opened since. Not damaged and forgotten, not buried by collapse and awaiting excavation. Deliberately sealed, intentionally enclosed within the masonry at the time of construction, walled shut from the inside, with no door, no window, no access point, as if the builders always intended that whatever was placed inside would never come out. I found this not through alternative history, through engineering surveys, through the structural analyses that have been conducted on various sections of the Great Wall over the past several decades as China has undertaken restoration and preservation efforts. These surveys use the same technologies employed in building inspection worldwide: ground-penetrating radar, ultrasonic testing, thermal imaging, tools designed to identify voids, weaknesses, and anomalies within solid structures. And the surveys have found voids, not the expected voids of deteriorated fill or collapsed internal rubble, geometric voids, regular shapes, spaces that appear on the scans as deliberately constructed chambers sealed within the body of the wall itself. And nobody talks about them. I need you to understand the scale of what we're discussing before we go further. The Great Wall of China is not a wall, it's a system, a network of fortifications stretching over 20,000 kilometers, when all branches, secondary walls, and associated structures are included. The construction spans over 2,000 years, from the earliest walls built by individual states in the 7th century BC through the massive Ming Dynasty construction of the 14th through 17th centuries. The wall you see in tourist photographs, the dramatic stone and brick structure snaking across mountain ridges, is primarily the Ming Dynasty wall, built between roughly 1368 and 1644. It is the largest construction project in human history. More material was used in the Great Wall than in every Egyptian pyramid combined. The scale is almost incomprehensible. And within that scale, the sealed chambers are a statistical whisper, small anomalies in a structure so vast that anomalies are expected, easily dismissed, easily explained away, easily lost in the sheer enormity of the thing itself, which is precisely what makes them so interesting to me, because the explanations offered for these chambers don't survive contact with the evidence. This raises a simple but critical question. Why would the builders of the Great Wall construct sealed rooms inside a military fortification? The official explanation, when one is offered at all, falls into predictable categories. Construction voids, spaces left by deteriorated wooden forms or scaffolding that was built into the wall during construction and later decayed, leaving cavities. Structural accommodations, spaces designed to absorb seismic stress or thermal expansion, engineering features built into the wall's design to prevent cracking. Storage chambers, sealed rooms used to store emergency supplies, weapons, or provisions that were walled shut and intended to be broken open only in times of extreme need. Each explanation is plausible for some voids. Deteriorated scaffolding does leave cavities. Seismic engineering does sometimes require internal spaces. Emergency storage in a military fortification makes tactical sense. But the deeper I went into the survey data, the more I found that these explanations don't account for all of the anomalies. Some of the detected voids are too regular, too geometric, too precisely constructed to be the remnants of decayed scaffolding. Some are in locations where seismic engineering would serve no structural purpose. Some are sealed with a quality of masonry that matches or exceeds the surrounding wall, suggesting not hasty wartime storage, but deliberate, planned construction as integral parts of the building process. Pull up any major structural survey of the Ming Dynasty wall sections. Look at the void analysis. Look at the shapes. Look at the distribution. The chambers aren't random. They cluster in specific sections. They appear at specific intervals. They occur in wall segments that correspond to specific construction campaigns by specific military governors during specific periods of the Ming Dynasty. The pattern isn't chaotic, it's organized. And organized anomalies in a structure built by one of the most bureaucratically meticulous civilizations in human history suggest not accident but intent. The silence was deafening when I started looking for the historical documentation of these chambers, because the Ming Dynasty documented everything. The construction of the Great Wall was one of the most extensively bureaucratized engineering projects in pre-modern history. Labor records, material inventories, construction specifications, supervisory reports. The paper trail for the Ming Wall is enormous, and within that paper trail, references to sealed internal chambers are remarkably sparse, not absent, sparse. A few references in construction documents to interior spaces whose purpose is described in terms so vague they could mean almost anything. A few notations in military records about sealed provisions that don't specify what the provisions were. A few gaps in the documentation that correspond to the wall sections where the surveys have detected the largest and most regular voids, as if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. Now go deeper. Because the Ming Dynasty wall, the one tourists visit, is built on top of older walls, much older walls. The earliest fortifications in the Great Wall system date to the Warring States period, the 5th through 3rd centuries BC. These walls were made of rammed earth, not brick and stone. They were cruder, more expedient, built under the pressure of military necessity rather than the relative leisure of Ming Dynasty imperial engineering. And when Ming builders constructed their wall, in many sections they built directly on top of the older foundations, incorporating the ancient structure into the new one. The deeper I went into the archaeology of the wall's foundations, the more I found that the sealed chambers aren't exclusively a Ming Dynasty phenomenon. Some of the voids detected in structural surveys correspond not to the Ming construction layer, but to older layers beneath it. Layers that predate the Ming by 1,000 years or more. Spaces that were sealed into rammed earth walls during the Qin dynasty, or possibly earlier, and that were then enclosed again within the Ming brick and stone construction built on top. This means that some of the sealed chambers inside the Great Wall have been sealed not since the Ming dynasty, but since the original construction. Since the time of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, who unified the earlier walls into a single system around 221 BC, sealed for over 2,000 years, enclosed within a structure that was itself enclosed within a later structure. Chambers within chambers, sealed within sealed, a nesting of hidden spaces stretching back to the very origin of the wall itself. This raises a question that the construction void explanation cannot answer. Why would the builders of the earliest walls, rammed earth fortifications built under extreme military pressure by conscripted laborers, take the time and effort to construct sealed internal chambers? Rammed earth construction is brutal, simple work. You pound earth between wooden forms until it compresses into a solid mass. You don't create geometric voids inside a rammed earth wall by accident. You create them by building a form within the earth, filling and compressing around it, and then removing or sealing the form. It's additional labor, additional complexity, additional time. In a construction project driven by the urgency of military defense, where every laborer was conscripted and every day of construction was a day the border was vulnerable, someone made the decision to build rooms inside the wall that would never be opened. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision along the wall's entire length. Because the sealed chambers aren't limited to one section, they appear across multiple provinces, multiple construction periods, multiple dynasties. As if the practice of building sealed rooms into the wall wasn't a one-time decision by a single governor or engineer, but a tradition, a continuous practice maintained across centuries of construction by builders who understood that the wall was supposed to contain these spaces even if the documentation doesn't explain why. Here's where the thread connects to something that the official history of the Great Wall treats as folklore, and that the local communities along the wall treat as fact, because the people who live in the villages along the wall, the descendants of the laborers and soldiers and settlers who have existed alongside the structure for centuries, have their own accounts of what's inside it, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. The local traditions describe the sealed chambers as tombs. Not tombs in the formal sense of planned burial sites with grave goods and memorial inscriptions. Tombs in the sense of bodies sealed within the wall during construction. Workers who died during the building, entombed where they fell, built into the structure they were constructing. The tradition is so widespread along the wall's length that it constitutes one of the most pervasive pieces of folklore in Chinese culture. The Great Wall is built on bones. The bodies are inside it. The wall is a tomb as much as it is a fortification. The official archaeological position is that this tradition is largely mythological. While some human remains have been found in and around the wall, no systematic evidence of deliberate entombment within the wall's structure has been confirmed through excavation. The bodies, if they exist within the sealed chambers, have not been documented because the sealed chambers have not been opened. The deeper I went, the more the circular logic of this position became impossible to ignore. The tradition says bodies are inside. The archaeology says there's no evidence of bodies inside. But the archaeology hasn't opened the sealed chambers. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence when the places where the evidence would be found have been deliberately kept closed. And here's where the story becomes more complex than a simple question of entombed workers, because the local traditions don't just describe bodies sealed in the wall. They describe specific bodies. They describe rituals. They describe the practice of sealing living beings into the wall as a form of foundation sacrifice, a practice documented in construction traditions across the ancient world, in which a living being was entombed within a structure at the time of its construction to serve as a spiritual guardian, to bind the structure to the earth, to animate the wall with the spirit of the being sealed inside it. Foundation sacrifice is not a fringe concept. It's one of the most extensively documented ritual practices in ancient construction worldwide. The practice appears in Mesopotamia, where clay tablets describe the sealing of sacrificial offerings into building foundations. In Europe, where human remains have been found within the foundations of bridges, castles, and churches dating from the medieval period back to the Bronze Age. In Japan, where the practice of hitobashira, human pillar, describes the sealing of living people into the foundations of castles and bridges. In Africa, where foundation sacrifice was documented by colonial-era ethnographers across multiple cultures. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across every civilization that built at monumental scale. The belief that a structure required a spirit to sustain it, that the spirit was provided by sealing a being within the structure, that the being's death within the wall was not murder but transformation, not destruction but installation. The being became the wall became alive, and the Great Wall of China, the largest structure ever built by human hands, was constructed by a civilization that practiced foundation sacrifice in other contexts and that maintains a continuous folk tradition stretching across centuries and across thousands of kilometers that the wall contains sealed bodies. The official explanation collapses here, because you cannot simultaneously maintain that the folk tradition is mythology and that the sealed chambers have never been opened. You cannot claim the tradition is false without examining the evidence, and you cannot examine the evidence without opening chambers that have been sealed for centuries, possibly millennia, within the most symbolically important structure in Chinese civilization. This is the dilemma that has kept the chambers sealed, because opening them risks more than structural damage. It risks confirmation. It risks finding what the tradition says is there. It risks revealing that the most celebrated construction project in human history, the symbol of Chinese civilization, the pride of a nation, the most visited monument on Earth, contains human remains sealed within its structure as part of a ritual practice that modern sensibility finds horrific. And so the chambers remain sealed. The surveys detect them. The engineers note them. The documentation describes them in terms so vague they could mean anything. And the tradition persists, whispered along the wall's length by the descendants of the people who built it and who know, in the way that local knowledge always knows what institutional knowledge refuses to acknowledge, what's inside. I'm not telling you the Great Wall is full of bodies. I'm telling you the wall contains sealed chambers that have never been opened. I'm telling you that structural surveys have detected geometric voids consistent with deliberate construction. I'm telling you that the local tradition, maintained for centuries across thousands of kilometers by the communities who live alongside the wall, consistently describes sealed human remains within the structure. I'm telling you that this tradition has never been either confirmed or refuted because the chambers have never been opened. I'm asking what's inside the wall, not what the engineering surveys suggest, not what the folklore claims. What's actually inside the sealed chambers that have been closed since the wall was built. I'm asking why, in an age of ground-penetrating radar and fiber-optic cameras and minimally invasive archaeological techniques that could investigate a sealed chamber without structural damage, nobody has looked. I'm asking why the largest structure in human history is allowed to keep its secrets. Go stand on the Great Wall if you ever get the chance. Feel the stone beneath your feet. Look at the thickness of the walls on either side of you. Look at the solidity, the permanence, and ask yourself what's behind the surface, what's inside the structure you're standing on, what was sealed within it at the moment of its construction and has been waiting in the dark ever since.